All right. What's up, everyone? Here for another episode. We got a special guest today, Sean. Sean, thanks for joining us. How we doing?
Hey, doing good, guys. Good to be here.
All right. So he is SEC man. He knows everything about the SEC. So today's a football show. We're just going to get into all things SEC. We're going to start off with the SEC coaching hires. There's a lot of different coaching hires that went on. Who did you like in terms of what school got who, I guess?
Yeah, it's kind of a different year. We've had a lot of shakeup in some of the last several years. Obviously, the one everybody's most interested in, right, is Brian Kelly at LSU.
Yep.
He's got the financial supporting and backing, and it's a lot easier to recruit with admissions and things of that nature than it is at Notre Dame. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the big one we're all really interested in. And I'm really interested in the Florida hire, of course, Billy Napier, and the guy can coach, right? So the question is, can he recruit? And
Right.
that's the problem because you start now. It used to be if you went to the SEC, you had to catch Alabama in recruiting. That was the thing. If you wanted to win the SEC, you had to catch Alabama. Now you have to catch Alabama and Georgia. And of course, Georgia's on that side, and they have
Yeah.
everybody has the inroads right now to recruiting in Florida, but Florida. And Dan Mullen's biggest problem was, I was a big critic of him all the way through. Yeah, he might be a good X's and O's coach, but you got to be able to recruit. You got to love recruiting. Your staff has to love recruiting. He never did embrace recruiting, and he's stuck with the 3 and 4 star guys. So, Billy's he's inheriting I think a thinner roster than people realize, even though it's the University of Florida. He's got a lot of competition things he's got to get past. So that one right there, those are the two that stick out, and I'm really, really none of us know the answer to. But
Yeah.
I think that Brian Kelly is going to do really well at LSU if he can fit in personality wise. That was the thing about LSU. It's not a fit for everybody. You've got to be a little
Yeah.
value crazy if you're gonna succeed down there. So, but he fielded a team that was always competitive. I know we look back at the playoffs, but listen, even in the playoffs, the teams they were losing to in the semifinals were beating the next opponents a lot of times by the same amount. So the
Yeah.
last year, so
Yeah.
that's a real question for me. Can both of can Kelly fit in? Because I think he can recruit. I think he can coach. Can he fit in enough in the culture? And then for Billy, can he recruit?
Yeah. So I totally agree with that. And your point about Dan Mullen, he even sometimes said in basically press conferences that he didn't think you had to recruit and all that kind of thing. And that's a good point. And to your point about Florida, though, is like Georgia's now like, I mean, it's Bama, then it's Georgia, or it's Georgia, then it's Bama. So you have to worry about that more so than you did in the past. And I think the LSU thing is interesting because, like, Coach O, he obviously kind of fit. He was Bayou crazy, but he's not the best X and O's coach. And neither was Les Miles, but both of them managed to win a national championship. Now, I think Brian Kelly is more of a business guy than those two were, so it is definitely a different fit for him. But in terms of being able to win, he's proven to be a winner everywhere he's gone. And now, like you said, he's able to be at a school that, like I said, the last two coaches, I mean, they aren't great head coaches and both won a national championship. So that gives him a lot of leeway there.
Yeah, and it's going to come down, I think, what you made mention of both of them. Especially when you talk about Orgeron, he won a championship a lot to do with the staff that he had around him. He had a
Mm-hmm.
really good staff there that year. They were able to
Mm-hmm.
go out and recruit. I don't think it's as big of an issue for Brian Kelly to be able to fit in and recruit as it is his ability to hire staff members that can recruit
Yeah,
at that level and fit in into the local schools. If he's able to do that, you know how you fit in at LSU, you win. If
yeah,
you win, you're going to fit in. They're
for
going to build
sure.
this statue. They just want to win. They want to compete with Alabama. They don't want to have to be, close all the time, but no cigar. And so I really, really like that hire. It was surprising a little bit for me, but, because it didn't seem like the most natural fit. But the more you look at it, the more you think what Brian Kelly has done with the admissions difficulties, he won't have that at LSU. I mean, I promise you, if you get them signed, they'll find a way if there's any way to get those guys admitted and eligible and all of that. So
For
he's
sure.
got a pretty good situation. I like that fit. I think he's going to do well there.
For the going back to the Florida hire, like obviously, yeah, you have the Alabamas and the Georgias that you have to compete against on the recruiting trail, uh, but like now you have Cristobal down in Miami, and you have Florida State. I know it seemed like they were stuck in the mud for a couple of years, but it seems like I forgot his name at Florida State, but he seems to finally be kind of building some momentum. So do you think it's more than just recruiting against your own conference, but now you're trying to compete with the two other big schools in the state of Florida as well?
Yeah, I think I think you're right, but I think it's across the board. Like recruiting is no longer about where you're located as much as how much you're willing to spend. And programs that are willing to spend, USC, these schools out Oregon, these schools out like I really expect Dan Lanning to have a lot of success at Oregon because they're going to give him all the resources he needs. He really knows how to recruit, put teams together, and watch for them. They're going to dip down in Florida to get guys. It isn't about just where you're located no more. These guys are spending millions and millions of dollars, travels, helicopters, it doesn't matter. And you're right, the ability to lock down the state nowadays it's pretty much out the door. The only state that I think you can still do that if you're good is LSU, because teams are brought up in Louisiana to just like LSU that's it. But they haven't been competitive every year in and year out. So Alabama's got their foot in there most notably, and they've got to work that out. But you're right. You can't just put a fence around a state no more. You've got to do this thing across the nation.
And for Brian Kelly and LSU, I know it's been like, I don't pay attention to LSU recruiting, but I know at Notre Dame, it's been multiple times where he didn't enjoy recruiting. It was more, I'm not going to say it was the Dan Mullen levels, but he relied heavily on his the Tommy Reeses, the Marcus Freemans, the Mike Gelsons of the world to kind of bring in the guys, and he would kind of pick and choose when he would get involved. Do you think that can come out and eventually burn LSU, or do you think it's not going to be as hard because it's LSU, you're in the South, and admissions aren't as difficult like you've already pointed out?
I think it's easier, obviously, to recruit at LSU, and I think that he's trying. I mean, you see the dancing and all the stuff he's doing with the recruits. Like, he's trying to be that guy that fits in. It's going to come down to his staff, because Dan Mullen's problem was Dan Mullen didn't have that urgency with his staff. You can have a head coach who's just a closer, and that guy just goes and he closes the deals. And when you're in the big recruits, I think Kelly can do that. I think he's trying to do that. And I think he better do that, because you can't win the SEC consistently developing 3s and 4s. You got to be developing 4s and 5s, and that's the reality. And it's not just like, look, that division now is, I mean, Arkansas. Who would have thought 2 years ago they were going to be in the shape that they're in now? Pittman is doing a fantastic job down there.
Yeah.
Ole Miss with Lane Kiffin. I mean, they're going to get the athletes, they're getting the transfers. These teams, even Mississippi State, they're a little bit of an anomaly there with the Mike Leach offense. So there's no off games in the in the SEC, especially in the Western Division. You've got to have the depth. You can't, and see, that was Notre Dame's thing. Like, they have the front guys that can compete in that starting 22, but when you go to those deeper levels, when injuries catch in, when all that happens, they didn't have it to compete 4 quarters. They were there for 3, but they couldn't do it in 4. And so he's got to be able to build that. He's got a lot of amazing resources. He's got a lot of opportunity. It will be how he builds that staff, and if he continues with the urgency, at least with the staff, to recruit.
Do you think his I know, because he signed I don't blame him for leaving because his contract was insane, but do you think his contract will kind of make his leash a little bit longer? Do you think if he struggles out of the gate, like you said, he's going to face Alabama every year. He's going to face Texas A&M. He's going to have a really tough schedule. And we already know in the past, especially at Notre Dame, what he did against, I think he was 3-10 against top 10 teams. Do you think if he kind of struggles out of the gate in the first 2 to 3 years, do you think that the fans will kind of think that dancing is weird and he's not as good of a coach as they might have thought?
Let's just be, realistically, he's not a Southern guy, right?
Right.
He's not. I mean, and that's okay, because Nick Saban's not a Southern guy, but he wins. No. And he's, he kind of was kind of quirky and weird a little bit too when he arrived at LSU in the beginning. You're right about, I think the contract maybe gave you a year or something like that, but he can go. I think people realize there that the LSU roster has some really good players on it, but
Yeah.
they have been absolutely decimated by the transfer portal over the last 3 years. I mean, it has been an open floodgate. You know, their best receivers at Georgia, their best defensive back, and from 2 years ago, the best defensive back receiver this year going to Alabama. Like, they've been decimated by this transfer portal. So I think he's got a good 2 years, but that third year, he had better be at least in the final minutes of that Alabama game, or he's gonna feel the heat. He's got a little time because realistically, the transfer portal has killed him, and he's gonna have to, and he's got to use that to his favor to build it back up. So they're real thin there, even though they got some talent, but he's gonna have to by year 3, he's gonna have to be competitive, really competitive.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to your point about, and then we'll move on, but to your point about the whole locking down the state of Florida, you know, when we look back at this year, you know, because it's national now, like you said. When you look back at this year, for example, Ohio State, C.J. Stroud, California kid. Clemson's quarterback, California kid. Bryce Young, California kid. You know, we had like, I think preseason, the top 5 quarterbacks were all California kids. Matt Corral was another one, California kid. So, like, you can get kids from anywhere. NIL, you know, this is perfect in our next one. NIL is a huge thing now. So, yeah, I agree with your thing about, like, you have to be able to recruit anywhere now. And you don't, you know, the state of Florida isn't just Florida versus Miami. It's Florida versus maybe Oregon now. It's Florida versus, you know, all these different things. But moving on, I wanted to get into, so obviously National Signing Day, the big thing was like Bro Bible wrote an article that Texas A&M boosters spent ungodly amounts of money to pay these players. Jimbo got all mad and blah, 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 blah. My first thing, though, is I want to say is, like, even if the boosters did do that, who cares? Because now it's legal. So I don't know why people are necessarily that mad, or why even Jimbo would get mad if it is true, because it's like, you know what, it's legal. But what's your thoughts on that whole situation with A&M? A&M has a lot of money. We all know that. And I guess what's your thoughts on that whole situation when that all came out?
Yeah, I knew it was coming. I just didn't know if it was going to be Texas or Texas A&M, right? Like, there's too much oil money in the state of Texas.
Yeah.
One of those teams not to take advantage of it. The NIL itself is kind of like the transfer portal to me. It has some value. There's some good things about it, but it really needs to be fixed. It's way too wide open right now. It's, you know, I like the transfer portal. Go back to that. Like, okay, I think it's good that a player can get that year, is, you know, to change his mind or whatever. But now look at Lincoln Riley, right? Like, he's leaving and he's taking his players with him. And I think a player should have to sit out if they're going to go to the same place their coach leaves to. There's too much open room there. NIL, same thing. I mean, it's just a free for all. Nobody is going to, I mean, when are we going to step in? And the further they let it go out, the more difficult it's going to be. I think players, there's a process there for them, you know, to get some money and to get paid, but not to change the whole game and how the structure is. So it needs fixing. But let me give you an example. So Nick Saban, you know, going back to LSU, Nick Saban, a lot of people remember a lot of things about him. The thing that will stick out to me about his success over the years will be his ability to find the gray area and recruit there without breaking the rules. Let me give you an example. Remember when Landon Collins committed from the state of Louisiana to Alabama? Everybody was, so the bomb was upset on TV, and it was a big thing. Well, later on, it came out that his girlfriend had got a job inside the Alabama front office there, in the administrative office. And the thing is that the handbook came out and they forgot to put that as against the rules for football. They put the other sports, they forgot to list it as football. Nick Saban stood up and made the most out of it. And, you know, we've seen him do that throughout time, like bringing in old players, like NFL players that were just getting out of the NFL that didn't make it, and practicing with those guys, you know, getting them. He knows those gray areas. So you can't be mad at the guy who finds the area, then operates within it. Be mad at the system who doesn't have the gates locked around it and fixed, where we know there's no rules. I can't blame the guy for getting the most out of it. And I can't blame Texas A&M for wanting to be good. Like, take advantage of what you have. That's the golden rule of recruiting. You can get in that gray area and play around without breaking the rules. He's done that. Yeah, it kind of sucks the way it's being done, but that's the rules. So if you don't like the rules, change them. If not, this is what we're going to have.
Yeah, I agree. It's it's the first year of most of it, and it's kind of just like the wild west where anything goes right now. So there's a lot of, like you said, gray areas. And the transfer one is crazy because, you know, it's almost – not almost. It is a new recruiting, right? You know, guys just reset after a year. You know, 24/7 Sports now has to come up with the recruiting rankings, including transfers. And that, you know, is some class could be the 12th recruiting class. Then you throw in their transfers, the number one class going into next year. And these guys can play right away. So you really have to take it into effect. Yeah, I mean, like you said, Texas and Texas A&M, it's they do have so much money, so it's tough to do much. But they do have to kind of have some set of rules because, you know, there's a difference between the whole team of Miami signing a deal with a company that wants to pay them a lot of money and a recruit getting money from a donor that no one has any clue what for, why, or what. And it's the only reason why they committed there. So there's a lot of gray area that I think they do have to clean up. But it's like, when are they going to clean it up? Because like you said, if they keep pushing it back, it's like, how do you really clean it up at all?
And I think like going back to that, like, you know, I think there needs to be limits and ways that they do it. But even if you leave it uncapped amount, make sure they're on. I think they should have to be on rosters before they can get money, because if it involves recruiting, that's a completely different thing than making money off the likeness of your image. That is getting money to go play somewhere. And I think that's where that balance, like, at least cut it out of recruiting and make it where once you arrive on campus, you can. But now in the transfer portal, they're working out deals, NIL deals, to where you're going to go. Like, this is opening Pandora's box. That, you know, I think take it out of recruiting and that fixes a lot of the problems, and transfer portal, of course.
For sure, Caleb Williams is a great example of that. I mean, obviously Lincoln Riley went there, but he had a Beats deal like 30 seconds after he signed with USC. You know, that was in the works before he signed there. Yeah, I thought Lincoln Riley is a funny example because, you know, he kind of ripped on the transfer portal, but then he took not just players from the transfer portal, players from his old school. I think that is a super gray line that they need to clear up. And I agree with you. I think if you are transferring to where your coach goes, yeah, you should have to sit because, let's be honest, Lincoln Riley was probably talking to them while they're at their bowl game. He was probably talking to him. You know, you're crossing a lot of gray lines where it's like it's not even ethical. You know, Caleb Williams is preparing for Oregon, and Lincoln Riley is probably like, hey, I got this Beats by Dre that they talked about. Like, that's just not how it should be done. So, wait, I meant to ask you at the beginning, are you a fan of any specific team in the SEC?
No, I get accused of it every year, depending on who I'm covering the right way, you know.
Okay, I accuse you of Georgia when I looked at some of your tweets.
Yeah, everybody does, because it's like I was saying, like, okay, so 3 years, or excuse me, Kirby Smart's first year, Georgia fans hated me because I was like completely wrong. I was like, this is a terrible hire. You got an unproven commodity. He sucked the first year. I ripped him. Then I had to go back and eat crow. Well, then you begin to see the thing, and you're like, okay, everybody, watch out. And I start defending him. People are like, he's not developing talent. Well, you know, as I was pointing out then, his first number one class were seniors this year. He had to build that depth up. He got into a national championship game, was right there with them his second year. So he's done an amazing job there. And I've been very complimentary of that. But there was 4 or 5 years ago, Georgia fans hated me. So that's the nature of the beast. Who you cover and who you really go for. That's who they're going to say. My favorite team is not FBS school, and it's Jacksonville State. That's the team that I follow through and through. But actually, you know, I grew up in Detroit as a and I was more of a Michigan basketball fan than anything else. Like, I was during the Fab Five era, right? So like,
yeah.
You know, that's why I'm out there defending Juwan right now. Like,
Yeah.
but you know, so I didn't grow. I lived in moved to the South in high school, and it was out in the state of Alabama. Never lived in the state of Georgia. I've only been there for football and a couple drive-throughs, but yeah, every time. But as long as they continue to do what they're doing, I'm going to keep pumping them up. So, and it makes people mad, which is funny.
Yeah, definitely. And there's nothing like SEC Twitter, right? Like, you say one bad thing about their coach, and even if you compliment him for 10 years straight, there's always going to be that handful of people like, get off the bandwagon. You can't like him now. And it's like, well, I just said I was wrong, you know?
Yeah, and I would like one of those Twitters to start up with a lot of power instead of old takes exposed, like old takes like approved. Because like, man, you say one thing wrong, you're going to hear about it for 15 years. You say 100 things right, you'll never hear about it again. And you bring it up and you're just being cocky and obnoxious. But it's like, yeah, I missed on Kirby Smart, but boy, I sure nailed it on Dan Mullen, right? Like
Yeah.
and like when everybody else is like, that was the other thing that really Florida fans really, really hate me because I was so like Dan Mullen's going to explode. Just wait and see. He's working with it now, but he doesn't. They hated me, and so that set the perfect storm for Georgia fans. I probably got probably 15,000 Georgia fans that follow me on Twitter, so that obviously gives it a flavor of that as well. But hey, man, look, Old Take exposed me, but geez, man, give me the applause every now and then, man. Like they never do that. So get used to that, guys. That'll be the rest of your career. I've been doing it over 10 years, and that's the way it always is.
So going back to Georgia, and I run a Notre Dame fan account, or we do a podcast, and for like I don't want to bring up Notre Dame, but their biggest downfall, it seems to be, is their quarterback play. And we've seen it in the playoffs both times. And if you look at before this year, if you look at the 5 winning quarterbacks, you had like Mac Jones, you had Trevor Lawrence, you had Joe Burrow, you had some like really good quarterback play, and everyone thought like, well, you need probably a first round draft pick at quarterback to really even stand a chance. Well, then here comes Stetson Bennett, a former walk on, and really just kind of defied all odds. Well, then you kind of look at the rest of the roster, and it's 5-star, 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 like in the 2 deep. So my question is, like, did Georgia win despite of Stetson Bennett because they were stacked everywhere else, or could you have a semi-normal roster? And what I mean by that is not have a 5-star at every position and still win with, I guess you could say, a former walk-on at quarterback.
So the thing about that is, we've got to acknowledge that was like a historic defense, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, I did some stats on it. It was ridiculous. I'll lay those out for you real quick. 1.67 points per game, or excuse me, points per quarter in the first quarter all season long. They didn't give up a touchdown the first quarter all season long. Second quarter, 2.67, and most of those were in the Alabama game. Almost nothing else at first SEC championship game. Third quarter, they only gave up 0.93 points per game. So the first and the third, I mean, you just couldn't score a touchdown. They gave up a touchdown the whole, one touchdown, I believe, the whole third quarter. In the fourth quarter, 3.53. But you have to remember on top of that all but 2 of those touchdowns were with blowouts with less than 4 minutes left, and the other 2 was South Carolina 46-yard drive after a turnover, and Alabama 16-yard drive after the Stetson Bennett turnover in the championship game. So they were just unbelievable. Like, I don't know if we'll ever fully appreciate it because they had one bad quarter all season in that second quarter against Alabama. They tried some new things that blew up on them, and they fixed it. But everybody will always think back that second quarter. But one thing I find interesting about that is, and you're right about the talent that they had on the defense. I mean, actually, though, it's kind of interesting, their best player you could argue was Jordan Davis or Nakobe Dean, but Jordan Davis was a 3-star coming out of high school. Not a whole lot of people knew a whole lot about him. But one thing I find really interesting about them, and I think bodes really well for them in the future, is that, their top receivers outside of the one that transferred, who I think was like 3rd in receiving, they were all freshmen and sophomores, and one of them was a 3-star. Obviously Brock Bowers had a record year, was a 4-star but had a record year. Those guys are really young at wide receiver, and a lot of those players they got a walk-on quarterback. They had a 3-star wide receiver that was 2nd receiving, like freshman, broke all the records. Like, they need a little more credit, I think, for that. But you're right. I think the difference is how they recruit on that offensive line. That's the difference. If you can give your quarterback time like they do, they are loaded. They had so many injuries this year. A lot of people didn't realize they didn't follow them. They lost their left tackle, their right guard. But they're so stacked at offensive line from Pittman's time there, especially. When you got that, you can compete. Stetson, I think we also need to give Todd Monken a lot of credit because he developed a lot from last year to this year. And I'm interested to see what he does this year. And he better stay healthy because it's real young behind him.
Now, does Georgia – so obviously I I actually created a tier system for college football today, and I put Georgia in there only because if you're the reigning national champion, I think you should be at the tier or top tier. But besides Georgia, I put Alabama and Clemson. I don't put anyone else in there. But does a new team like Georgia and with all the NIL stuff going on, so it seems, at least on paper or through social media, uh, seems like the college landscape is it's not so top heavy with Alabama, Clemson, and Georgia, and probably Ohio State. It seems to be evening out with USC. Uh, Miami seems to be pointing in the right direction. So does Texas. Who knows about like Notre Dame or Michigan? So does Georgia kind of give all of the rest of college football hope, or is that just kind of a blip in the radar?
Yeah, if you can put together one of the top defenses of all time, I think you got a pretty good shot, right? Like I think outside of a historically good defense that was you have to remember, so they had like those guys coming back last year, Kobe Dean, Jordan Davis, all those guys coming back gave them so much depth, and they're going to be really good on defense again this year because see, they play. A lot of people don't realize they'll go 28, 30 deep on defense during the game. Like they rotate to keep those guys fresh. But I think for the rest of the world, you have to have a great quarterback if you're going to win, because I think it's just an anomaly of unless if Georgia has a good defense, they don't win this year. But They had a historically great defense. And so I think the Georgia fans, like a lot of them didn't want Stetson Bennett back because they still want that elite quarterback. But I think Stetson was better than we give him credit for. I was hard on him. I didn't, but he improved a lot under Todd Monken this year. So, but I think in general, you better have a great quarterback.
Yeah, I think that national championship, it changed a lot in that second half with Stetson Bennett because obviously if they weren't able to manufacture those drives to score in the late third and fourth quarter, I think everyone's having that same conversation where it's like, yeah, you need an elite quarterback to win, and Stetson is really not even close to that to be able to compete if you're Georgia. Moving on, though, East-West division winner for next year, right now, if you had to pick.
I don't think nothing changes. I think we're looking at Georgia, Alabama for some period of time if LSU doesn't catch up. The usuals over there, obviously LSU, Auburn is going to be terrible next year probably after everything they've got going on. Ole Miss probably isn't ready to make that jump, though you better watch out for them. There's some interesting things happening there. And then Texas A&M. Texas A&M to me has to prove that they can sustain it over a season. And that's the problem with them. Since no matter who the coach is, they always look really, really good at times. Like, Johnny Manziel beats Alabama, but then they lose to teams they shouldn't lose to. So Texas A&M has a shot, but they got to go through Alabama. And I think Georgia has a really, really good, easy track. They got Oregon to start the season, which is, difficult, but their track to the SEC championship is pretty solid after that. So obviously that doesn't play to the SEC championship, but as far as national championship, it does. So I think it's Georgia, Alabama, until one of these teams can pop up. There's no reason to believe they're still the most talented teams in the conference, no matter what rankings tell you. Those two guys, two most talented teams.
For A&M, is it kind of like if not now, then when? Right. Just because it's like I saw a stat they've had one double, like basically 1 10+1 season since like the 80s, and that was Johnny Manziel's team.
I'm not trying to. And now would be the time because Alabama wide receivers have a lot of question marks that we're not used to over the last, I don't see 4 first rounders like we're used to seeing on that team at the wide receiver. And I thought that Bryce Young, to be honest, I didn't vote for him for Heisman because I thought he had one of the most so many of his passes were either wide open by 8 yards or they were short passes taken deep. His stats were unbelievable. He made all the plays, but he didn't have – the SEC championship he did. But outside that, he didn't have a lot of Heisman moments. Like they would hype up it was cool. He threw a no-look 3-yard pass, right? But in reality, it was the receivers last year that were really so dominant. So it's interesting to see what they're going to do with a little less talent at that wide receiver point. If Texas A&M can jump them, you're right. If not now, win.
Yeah, for sure. Do you see obviously you follow the SEC very closely, but do you see anyone, outside of the SEC has been dominating national championships since early 2000s. It's been SEC basically. If someone else wins it, everyone's kind of shocked, right? Uh, Clemson had kind of a down year, but who know? Like they'll probably be back. I would assume they'd be back. They also get the ACC isn't good yet. I think they're getting better, but they're not good yet. So they do have that always to fall back on too. Do you see Ohio State or someone being able to win it all next year, or do you think it's Bama, Georgia again? Not that they're going to play in the national championship again, but do you think it's up to those two again?
Right now, I would say so, but the one team obviously I think you have to look out for is Ohio State. I think Ohio State constantly has. They've recruited long enough that they've been doing this for a while. They got a lot of depth. I'm kind of interested in like Oklahoma State, kind of what they can bring to the table. I'm interested in Clemson. I kind of feel like Clemson's in a bad place right now, though, because they're continuously losing players in important positions. We're going to know a lot about how good of a coach Dabo really is after this year. But I would say that probably the team that I'm looking for to have a shot is Ohio State. I think they have the talent. That would be the team. Texas A&M would probably be my next team that has a shot to dethrone them. But right now, I think until something changes, those teams have the most proven commodity in the most important positions. And I think you got to go with those two. But Ohio State's dangerous. And, I think I like Michigan, but I think we saw the depth gap in that game against Georgia. Like they don't have that deep of talent like Georgia and Alabama. So it'll be interesting because I think there's a lot of question marks. But I think if I had to pick two that had a chance, it would be Ohio State and Texas A&M.
I agree with you. I've been saying this all year during the college football, I think, and right after. I think next year for Clemson is Dabo's biggest year. I think the ACC is slowly kind of closing in. They're starting to get like big name hires. Obviously, Cristobal. I think Florida State's in a better direction than they have been in the past 5 years, and even Wake's decent. And Pitt's pretty good. So like the ACC is going to be better in the next 5 years than it has been the previous 10. And like you said, they've lost so many people in terms of transfers and coaches. This is the first time Dabo has really ever dealt with that. And if you have another bad year, the clock starts ticking because it's not as easy. Clemson's not Bama. Clemson's not Georgia. Even in USC, they haven't been good lately, but they're still a school that you get the right coach in, they could be good within a year. So Clemson's not that. So I think I agree. I think Clemson, this is the biggest year in Dabo's coaching career by far.
Yeah, you're right, 100%. And I think a lot of the questions isn't just the transfer portal, but what players are saying on the way out. There's been a lot of controversy behind the scenes there. And so it's going to be interesting. He can turn around in the season. He's proven, one thing I got to say about him is, man, he does an amazing job of developing talent. You look at their recruiting classes, they always sign smaller, but he knows how to evaluate talent. He knows how to, but some of the personality issues seem to be coming more into play there at Clemson. It's going to be interesting to see if that's just a blip or if this is what we can expect over the next few years.
And this year he has to deal with not having his D coordinator, who's been his backbone for the past since he's really been the head coach at Clemson. He's one of the best coaches in football. That's why he got the Oklahoma job. And last year when they weren't good, they might only win 4 or 5 games if their defense wasn't top 10 in the country. So you don't have that to fall on anymore. Obviously their defense is still going to be good, but like that guy was maybe the best D coordinator in football because Kirby wasn't a D coordinator. Like he was a great D coordinator. He doesn't have that to fall back on anymore. So it's going to be interesting next year for Clemson. So my other question is, since we're Notre Dame fans, what did you think about the Marcus Freeman hire?
A lot of people, there's always, everybody's got the right take, right? And like, I feel like most of the time I get those right, but I like the hire because I think he's a really good coach. I think the way the players responded when he was announced shows a lot to do with who he is and what he's capable of. I think it takes a certain type of person to win at Notre Dame consistently because it is more difficult because of admissions and all those things. So I really like the hire. It may blow up in my face and look dumb, but I think he's going to have to. He'll have some growing pains, right? Like he'll have to learn what it is to be a head coach, to hire the right staff guys, to make changes when they need to be changed. but I think they're in really, really good hands with Marcus Freeman.
I agree completely.
And I say I would put them in that list of people we were talking about if there wasn't uncertainty of a new, this new process, having a new head coach. I think they've got talent there. I think he knows how to do it, and he's one of those guys that can win. I think he's a guy that can win anywhere he goes. I think he has that. The question is, how high is his ceiling? I think it's really high, but
Yeah.
that's what we'll be able to tell over time.
Yeah, I think talent-wise, I think in the next 4 years, Notre Dame will have as much talent as they've ever had in terms of the past 20 years since they've honestly probably won a national championship. So that's like, like you said, though, then it's the growing pains and can you coach? What's your ceiling? But I agree.
I think that Kelly went to a really good situation, but I think he went to a lesser talented program right now today. I mean, that he went to, but Notre Dame's got a lot of talent, and I think their guys have been coached well. I think they're to me, they're one of those teams that could slip in there. I'm just cautious because of the new coaching staff needing some time to develop and who they are.
Yeah, I know, like, Notre Dame fans, like, we're not used to seeing coaches leave. We're not used to seeing Notre Dame get used as like a stepping stone. If coaches leave, they're either fired, they go to the NFL. But I have to give credit because Brian Kelly left Notre Dame in a great situation. And if this was 10 years ago or 12 years ago, in, like, let's say 2010, I don't think Marcus Freeman would have been set up to be successful. I think he probably would have fell flat on his face because the depth chart is not. It's a million times better now than what it was in 2010. And I think we should say thank you to Brian Kelly for kind of putting him in a position to succeed.
He left him in a better position than he found him. That's for sure. I think they needed that constant longevity that he had there, the consistency that he had there. But I do think a guy like Marcus Freeman will attract players that Kelly didn't attract necessarily. He has a little more, I don't say swag, but he has a little more swag. Like, he's a player's coach.
Yes.
They really like this guy. But he also understands the discipline aspect of it as well. So I'm expecting big things, but time will tell. But he's one that I looked at it and said, really good hire.
I said this when they hired him, though. I was like, this is the first time since probably the 80s with Lou Holtz that you're going to play Notre Dame and be like, damn, that team has some swag. Like, they've been good, right? They played in national championships, right? They've done this. They played in big games. They've competed in some big games. They got their asses blown out in some big games. But this is the first time I think you're going to walk away and be like, wow, they got some swag now. Like it's a different type of team. But also to Marcus Freeman's, big boy, put your big boy pants on. We're going to find out week one, like they play at Ohio State week one. That's a welcome to a head coaching life right away.
Yeah. And the thing that I would say that the reason I like the hires, I think that Notre Dame always played some of these big games too tight. Mm-hmm. And I think he's a guy that will help loosen them up a little bit going up. I think they it's hard to explain in the right words, but they just seem like they were there not to get blown out at times, even though they had talent to compete. They were like, let's get to the fourth quarter and see what we can do. But I think he's more like, okay, I don't know how they say the balls to the walls. Let's go, let's play, let's do this. And they have the talent to do that, so do it.
Mm-hmm. Roll the dice more of a sense instead of being there, we got there, that's good. Let's just move on. Ryan, you got any other questions?
No, I was just gonna say that'll be an interesting. I think I think they're getting Ohio State at the right time. We've seen in the recent past that Ohio State slips up in September, and I don't know. I'm not saying they're going to win, but I think they're getting them. I'd rather have them in September than November. I'll say that.
Yeah, and you have the talent. Like, you have the talent to compete with them, and they typically kind of get better the later as the season goes on, as you said, and so it's good timing. But I think this Notre Dame is it's taking that next step. Like, you have the talent to do it. When you look on paper, they have the talent to do it, and this is going to be a really good team.
Yeah, we'll definitely have you back on. We appreciate you coming on. We're going to throw your Twitter out there so everyone can go get a follow. But, yeah, next year we should, before the season starts, during the season, everything, we appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Anytime. I enjoyed it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hey, thanks. Hold on.